Hey guys, this is a new series where I'll be looking more at the theory side of things, and in particular, in this video I'm going to be looking at deck building. For this video I've chosen to use one deck as an example, but a lot of the theory involved is applicable to other decks that are used in today's meta. So the deck I've chosen to analyse is Dino Rabbit, or Macro Rabbit, depending on when you picked up the game. Basically, towards the tail end of 2011 and for the duration of 2012, the most dominant deck was Dino Rabbit. And this deck played 3 copies of Rescue Rabbit, 3 copies of Tour Guide, and the focus of this deck was to get access to the rabbit. And then the rabbit was able to get you these cards straight from the deck. Now, on the face of it, you think, these two are vanilla monsters. What purpose could they possibly serve? Well, the purpose that they served in this deck was to X-Seed. You were able to overlay them, and the X-Seeds for this deck were things like Evolzart Lagia, which is a negation on legs. It negates a spell, a trap, or a summon. So it's pretty powerful. It's Solemn Warning on legs, essentially. Or Evolzart Dolka, which is arguably even more powerful. Dolka negates effects, and it doesn't matter where they are, so that'll be hand, grave, or on the field. Both extremely powerful cards. So you're starting to see the focus of the deck. Each deck should have a very, very tight focus on what it wants to achieve. Dino Rabbit was a deck that attempted to X-Seed into these extremely powerful monsters, and then it would sit behind its trap cards. Now, in that format, you had access to 2 copies of Warning, 1 copy of Judgment, but amongst this you had all the staples. You had double Bottomless, you had double Torrential, etc, etc, etc. Which meant that having these cards in conjunction with the Xyz was probably game. Now, understanding why other cards were played. Tour Guide from the Underworld. In the context, in that particular format, Tour Guide was extremely powerful. Towards the end of 2011, the most dominant deck was Tengu Plants, and Tengu Plants played 3 copies of this card. And it was purely because X-Seeds was a new mechanic, it was a new game mechanic, and it allowed you to get into a variety of extra deck monsters. It also allowed you quick and easy access to Tour Guide's little buddy, Sangan. And Sangan, as you know, is a card that lets you tutor a lot of monsters in the game. In Dino Rabbit, we played 3 copies of Tour Guide and 1 copy of Sangan, because you were able to tutor the Sangan, and Sangan can fetch you the rabbit. You're starting to see consistency here. So 3 copies of Rabbit because you want to draw the rabbit. It's your power card. It's the play that's going to allow you instant access to Evolzart Lagia or Evolzart Dolka. Tour Guide. Tour Guide could also get you to the rabbit, because once the rabbit would banish itself, you could summon the Tour Guide, overlay, special summon Sangan or another copy of Tour Guide, X-Seed for Levier, detach a material, summon the rabbit, and go crazy again. So you're starting to see why the Tour Guide is there. The Tour Guide has a very specific purpose in the deck. It's versatile, yes, but it has a very, very specific purpose in the deck. Now, the problem with the vanillas drawing these cards. The biggest issue with Rabbit was drawing the vanilla monsters, but you had to learn to play with them. In order to do this, we increased the trap lineup. You played a variety of traps to protect them, and they became beaters. It turned the deck into a more oppressive, control-based sort of deck. But nowadays, you have to think about this. If you were to pick up rabbits, and you wanted to play that deck in today's meta, you have various problems with that. 1, there's only 1 copy of Rescue Rabbit now. So would you really play 1 copy of Rescue Rabbit and 6 normal monsters in the same deck? the probability of you drawing the normal monster vastly outweighs the probability of you drawing the one copy of rabbit. So this would be a bad idea. At a push, you could probably get away with one of the two dinosaurs at 3 and the rabbit, but it's still not worth it. Not least if you intend to be competitive. Also, tour guide is at 1. You have to look at things like this when you're trying to build a deck, because obviously you want the most consistent deck possible. Now, it's moving forward with that deck. Looking at other cards that people played. Jurak Gwyber. If you don't know what Gwyber does, Gwyber, when it attacks and destroys a monster, is able to special summon another copy of itself to the field. This, obviously, means that you've got quick and easy access to Dolka and Lagia. So Gwyber was in the deck because it was another way to get you into these exceeds without the need of a rescue rabbit. And it's faster to exceed that way than by normal summoning 2 Sabersaurs or 2 Cabazors. Now, when the deck was at its peak, it ran 3 copies of Forbidden Lance. Why was Forbidden Lance run in this deck? Forbidden Lance, on the face of it, does 2 things. 1, it protects you from spell and trap cards, and 2, it gives your monster an attack decrease, or your opponent's monster. Now, we use this in the deck because your objective was to get to these 2. These were the cards that were going to lock your opponent out of the game. If you were playing against Mermail, you had Dolka, they draw into Dark Hole, you Forbidden Lance, Dolka survives, and Dolka continues to say, you can't play the game. With Lagia, it means you can't bait out my negation as easily, because your Dark Hole is going to get eaten up by Forbidden Lance, so I can still negate your cards. That's the reason that card was in the deck. But also, Forbidden Lance had quite a lot of synergy with Jurak Gwyber, because Gwyber needs to destroy something in battle in order to special summon another copy of itself, which gets you into your Exceeds. And you can help achieve this by using Forbidden Lance. You could attack with Gwyber, and in the damage step, activate your Lance on your opponent's monster, and your Gwyber would be able to hit over it. It gave you easier access. It made that play a lot easier. Now, another card that became very, very popular in this deck was Macrocosmos. I remember Jogi Orlando making a deck which became known as Macro Rabbit, and he included Macrocosmos because at the time in the format you had decks like Chaos Dragons and Insectors, which were incredibly relevant, and they both died to Macrocosmos. Macrocosmos finds itself at 1 because it is an oppressive floodgate. It doesn't let graveyard orientated decks function properly, and the beauty of it in this deck is that you don't care what goes to the graveyard, i.e. the rabbit's getting banished anyway, and your dinosaurs, it doesn't matter where they go. Obviously you'll try and protect them, but you don't really care if they get banished, because you have cards like Tour Guide from the Underworld, and Tour Guide from the Underworld gets you access to Levia, and Levia brings everything back. So running 2 copies of Levia in the extra deck was a way of mitigating the problem of you running out of resources, because it gives you extra recursion. And at the end of the day, if you're playing Macrocosmos against a deck that really needs its graveyard, you've immediately got an inherent advantage against that deck. The final thing I want to talk about in this video is boss monsters. Now, at the time, when people were playing Rescue Rabbit, when Rabbit was at 3, Tour Guide was at 3, a lot of decks tried to find space for Blackluster Soldier. And they justified this by saying, well, we have 3 copies of Tour Guide, and we can run cards like Effect Veiler or Thunder King Raya. So we've got a few lights in the deck, and we've got our tour guide engine to provide the docks. So it makes sense to run Blackluster Soldier because we can. Because we can is never a good enough reason to run a card. It's powerful, yes, and there will be games where you draw the Blackluster Soldier at the perfect moment with the perfect grave, and you're set, you're made. You win the game, and everyone calls for BLS to be hit on the list. But it's not like that. In a deck like Rabbit, it makes far more sense to build your strategy around oppressing and controlling the game, controlling the tempo of the game, controlling the plays that your opponent is able to make and not make. That, in my eyes, is a far stronger approach to how to play the deck properly. The reason I had Dark Arm Dragon in the previous shot is because Dark Arm Dragon falls under the same category. No, it can't be played in Rabbit. That's probably a horrendous idea. But it's a card that's teched any time people see dark monsters in a deck. And just briefly going to talk about why people use it in Evil Swarm. I myself tried this out. Why? Because I headed to Shriek, or people use Yu-Gi-Oh! The organisation nowadays to get access to Japanese deck lists. And Japanese players like their boss monsters. You'll rarely see an Evil Swarm deck list that doesn't feature Dark Arm Dragon. But over here in the TCG, we realised that consistency is absolutely everything. And having a card like Dark Arm Dragon really conflicts with your plays. For example, in a deck like Evil Swarm, when we got Kerakion, it allowed you to improve the way that you can regulate how many darks you've got in your grave at any given time. So surely that's reason enough to play Dark Arm Dragon. On the face of it, yes. In reality, no. Because Dark Arm Dragon is at 1. There is no way to search it in the Evil Swarm deck, so the only time you're getting it is when you draw into that 1 copy, which isn't going to happen in all of your games. Next, you have to draw it at the perfect moment, or at a time in the game where you're able to regulate the grave and get that number of darks to 3. So those 2 conditions have to be met before you can summon this card. Next, if you're playing Evil Swarm, it's because you've made a meta call. It's because you're playing against decks which are hurt by Ophion. Ophion locks players out of the game. It locked dragons out of the game. It's locked a lot of powerful decks out of the game in its time. Your Dark Arm Dragon can't be summoned whilst Ophion has a material attached to it. So it goes against your core strategy. It is only in there because it's a big boss monster. It gets worse now because a lot of the current decks at the minute play a lot of floaters. If you think about Shaddoll, you think about Burning Abyss. They really aren't bothered if Dark Arm Dragon goes off and pops a couple of things on the board because they're going to break even. So you haven't really minus them at all. And if it's Burning Abyss, they just cycle all of their stuff. The Graph grabs something, the Sir grabs something, the Dante comes back, etc, etc, etc. And it's a never-ending loop. So when you're building a deck, try to keep a very, very strong focus. And try and keep the focus on consistency. Try and think about examples, like the Dino Rabbit deck. I'm not saying go out and play Rabbit because it's amazing, although it is. If you haven't played it, go ahead and play it.